Today, our focus is going to be inclusive course design, and we have some great guests, and we're really excited for you to join us. The Women in STEM Cooperative is a group of volunteers who are dedicated to advancing women in STEM in our respective communities at the University of Buffalo and other universities. This series is our attempt to address some of the challenges and opportunities with improving student STEM success. Before we invite today's panel, we'd like to take a moment to welcome you. Over 140 colleges and universities representing over 140 of your colleagues that represent 56 institutions of higher education, and 8 other organizations from 4 countries, 1 territory, and 25 states are registered for this series. If you're joining us today, please say hello in the chat room and tell us where you're from. And now I'm going to introduce Patrice, my series co-chair from the Harvard Graduate School of Education.
Thanks, Letitia. In addition to sharing out knowledge, one of our goals is to provide a space for collaboration and an opportunity for each of you to develop new relationships and share a little bit about what's going on your campus. And with that in mind, we chose the Shindig platform because it does give the opportunity for you to have one-on-one conversations with other people that are in this session. And for those of you who are not familiar with how Shindig works, you'll see a menu on the bottom of your screen, and there's a little bubble with a question mark. If at any time during the session you have a question, we encourage you to type it in the chat box, the question box there, and then we will bring that question up to our panelists. What we would really love, however, is for you to click on the Raise Your Hand button, which will allow you to come up on stage and actually have a conversation with our panelists and ask your question that way. So we would really encourage you to take advantage of that feature and the opportunity to have that one-on-one conversation with some of our panelists. So before we get started, I would like to take a minute just to introduce our panelists and tell you a little bit about how the session will run. We're very lucky to have Thomas Tobin, who is Faculty Associate and Conference Programming Chair in the Distance Teaching and Learning Department at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. We also have Martin Samuels, who is Associate Director for Science in the Bach Center at Harvard University, and Roberta, also known as Robin Sullivan, who is an online learning and innovation instruction specialist for the Center for Educational Innovation at the University at Buffalo. And I would like to remind you that Tara from Shindig is in the audience, so if you're having any technical problems, you can put something in the chat box and she will come over and help you. And before we begin, we wanted to just give each of you an opportunity to introduce yourselves to somebody in the audience and have a chance to have a short conversation with them. And the way to do that is to simply click on somebody else's image, and you'll see that not everybody has their camera on, so we would encourage you, if you are in a space where you can do that, to turn your camera on. And to take a minute to click on somebody else's image and just say hello to them, share a little bit about, yourself, where you're from, and, what does inclusivity mean to you, and what is a challenge you're facing on your campus. So please, we're going to just take about 2 minutes. If you could click on the image of somebody else and just introduce yourself and have a short conversation. And after that, we will get started with our first guest. Okay, great. I hope that everyone had a good discussion and had the opportunity to meet somebody new that you didn't already know. And Tara will bring up our first guest now, Tom Tobin.
Hello, everybody, and hello, Patrice from sunny State College, Pennsylvania. Glad to be with you all.
Thanks for joining us today, Tom. We're looking forward to starting our discussion and learning a little bit about course design for inclusion with you.
Thanks a bunch.
So can you begin by telling us how you define UDL and your work, a little bit about your work in this area?
Sure. Just to give you a little quick overview, everybody, of Universal Design for Learning. If you could go to the next slide, please. Our colleagues in the Center for Applied Special Technology, that's CAST, in Boston, 90s, figured out that when we learn anything, and whether we're 6 years old or 60 years old, this applies. We need to activate 3 different networks in the brain. Those of you who know what the acetylcholine uptake pathway is, we're right there with you, and I'm going to go at a much simpler level today. We need to have a why, a what, and a how for things that we learn. One of the challenges is that when we are in formal learning environments, and especially I'm thinking about PhD programs, graduate school in the sciences and technology, lots of folks have barriers in their lives. And those barriers are things that I'm an advocate for trying to lower. And those barriers often fall disproportionately on the shoulders of women students and learners. So I'm really grateful to be part of this conversation. But UDL, Universal Design for Learning, multiple ways of keeping people engaged. This is the why. So a simple example, I went out into my kitchen last week and I saw there was water on the floor. One of the pipes had burst from under my kitchen sink. I had a very immediate why for learning because I needed to know how to shut off the water and fix that pipe. And so what did I do? I did what everybody else does. I Googled it. And so I figured out how to fix my problem. But I could have found an answer to that problem in many different ways. The same thing goes with representing information. When we think about accessibility, this is what most of us think about. This is putting captions on our videos. This is providing people with not only a text-based reading of a journal article, but also maybe a video they could watch or having some alternative way to get into that information. And then you also have to have a how. How do you demonstrate your skill? How many of us have written the standard 5 to 10 page paper for a course over and over and over again? Wouldn't it be great if we could demonstrate that same skill by taking the selfie camera on our phones and showing ourselves walking through a lab process and then allowing others to critique it rather than doing the 5-page paper? The real big part about Universal Design for Learning is having the choice in the first place. And if we go to the next slide, I actually take all that neuroscience and I boil it down to just +1 thinking. If there's one way for us to have an interaction with the materials, yes, but with each other, with instructors, with our students, with the wider world. If there's one way to have that conversation or interaction now, let's design one more way for that to take place. And it gives all of us as learners and as instructors more power, more choice, and we're more satisfied with the learning interactions we have. And cool bonus, it lowers barriers to access.
Thanks, Tom. So if you think back to when you first learned about UDL or thought about designing for inclusion, can you tell us a little bit about how you began thinking about it and the types of supports that you needed and challenges that you might have faced?
Yeah, absolutely, Patrice. If you go to the next slide, I want to share a story that doesn't appear in my new book called Reach Everyone, Teach Everyone, Universal Design for Learning in Higher Ed. But it really is one of the genesis points for me. I was a technology person at a 2-year college when I had just earned my doctorate and I was fresh on the job market. And this is back in the late 1990s. I was working on doing online courses. This tells you how old I am. I helped them adopt Blackboard version 1.0. So it's been a while, but I worked with a colleague in the business department. His name was Marty, and he came to me and he said, I want to teach online courses, not because I think they're great, but I sort of see the handwriting on the wall, which was kind of a bad pun for him because he had lost his sight due to complications from undiagnosed and untreated diabetes in his 40s, and he was rapidly going blind. And of course, I was a young professional. I said, sure, I'll help you. And then I went back to the literature to see what I should do. And there was no literature. Now, we did get Marty to the point where he was able to teach his online courses. If you flip forward one slide, Marty started out kind of not knowing what was what and what was where, but we got him to the point where he knew what the screen looked like and he could understand the structure of the learning management system. And we basically solved our problem by throwing graduate students at him from a nearby university. They would come in and read what students had posted in a discussion forum to him. He would respond and they would type it out. They would read the students' papers out loud to him. This is in the days before we had widespread access to read out loud applications or things like that. And it worked really well for 3 semesters until we realized we were violating privacy laws 6 different ways, and we had to stop. And it was that point that really caused me to take a look around and think, okay, if it was this difficult to help one colleague, who else are we not serving well? Who else is not able to sit at the table and be part of this conversation? And I started looking at people with work responsibilities, family responsibilities, military deployments, rural learners, first-generation college learners, anybody else who had a barrier to access to education. And I started to see that there were class-based, gender-based, and economics-based barriers that were in place that we really could address. And that's what started me going.
That's great. Thank you. And I know that in some of my discussions that I've had with faculty and instructional designers, when we mention UDL, a lot of times faculty are not really sure how that applies to their teaching and curriculum and content, or even if it does apply. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how STEM faculty might think about UDL and incorporating that into their classroom teaching.
This is an excellent question, and it also sets up Robin and Marty, who will be talking really specifically about this later. So let me talk generally and see if I can't set them up well. If we go to the next slide in the presentation, let's talk a little bit about visuals in science, technology, and math notation, and 3D. These are the hard questions of accessibility. So when we're talking about visuals, if you see on the left-hand side of your screen, it's just a diagram of some musculature in an anatomy class. And how do you make an alternative of that visual? If the assignment itself is you need to know the structure of these muscles and how they are put together, a text-based description really doesn't do it. So one of the challenges with accessibility that some people say is, well, if we can't make an alternative version of everything, why should we even bother? And the answer is you don't have to make an alternative version of absolutely everything. So if the test or the quiz or the lab or the demonstration, the end result is I can sketch out or diagram or correctly label the diagram, then people do need to know how to do that. And that's okay. But I give my students choices in all of the practice that they do that leads up to it. I do provide those spatially labeled diagrams. I do provide text-based content that is in relation to one another, so that maybe you're not looking at exactly the same diagram, but there's a text-based alternative or there's a description of it. The same thing is true for something like mathematical notation. There's LaTeX mathematical language, yes, but one of the most powerful things that we can do for accessibility, and by the way, I usually don't talk about accessibility, I just talk about access. So when we're talking about that +1 design, if you're using complex mathematical notation to describe something, one of the most powerful things you can do is take your selfie camera on your phone, set it up over the top of your own hand writing on a piece of paper, and then walk your students through all of the different pieces that make up that mathematical sentence. And by breaking it down into its simpler components, oftentimes those are things that you can represent in plain text, and then you show people how they get put together. Again, we're not talking about making accommodations. This is not making one change one time for one person like we do when we get the piece of paper from a student with a disability. This is all about offering people the options and choices to take in information, stay engaged, and then demonstrate their skills in more than one way. And when we're thinking about 3D modeling and making alternative versions for that, one of the challenges there is that those things are not easily described in alternative text versions. So when we have 3D models or we have interactive software that is very specialized, one of the best things we can do is to remove that format requirement. So you notice that on the screen we have a 2D image of a 3D model. That can really help by taking screen images and giving people access to something where they don't have to have the modeling software running, or they don't have to have the specialized program. Or conversely, put the screen recorder on with your computer when you're using the modeling software and make a little movie of it, so that the only thing that people need is a player version on their mobile device, and then they can still look at and benefit from all of those things that you're talking about in your STEM course. So accessibility is way more than just making alternatives. Accessibility is about +1 thinking, +1 design, and giving people choices in the interactions they're doing.
Thanks, Tom. And I love how your point about it not being about making one accommodation, but giving people choices. And in thinking about that, what are your thoughts on how we can have more, actually have change that leads to retention and student success? That, is really sustainable change, and not, one faculty member making one change in their course.
Yeah, it's an excellent way to think about the larger conversation that we're having. If we can go to the next slide, I always ask colleagues 3 questions. Say you've been teaching your biology or chemistry or mathematics course for years and years and years. You already know where you have pinch points. You already know where there are some barriers that students often don't get through. And we're talking less about, gendered barriers here than just general barriers because of people's schedules or people's access methods. And so where do your learners always repeat the same questions? That you get the same email 700 times in week 2 about this particular topic. That's a great place to start doing some of that +1 design. Where do they always get it wrong on the tests and you end up reteaching things? That's a great place to allow learners to have more than one way to demonstrate their skills, so that maybe somebody who's not terribly good at writing something out can at least practice up in the study guide period toward the exam in a way that feels better or natural for them. And where do they always ask for alternative explanations? Gee, Professor Patrice, that was great, but I still kind of don't get it. That's a great place where you see there's a pinch point. You end up having to say something over and over again or get a different way. And you don't even have to do the work. You can ask colleagues to make quick videos or come in as guests into your interactions and give students a different perspective or a different way or a different method of looking at things. The next slide is really important, and I'll wrap up this way. The next slide shows a person on the bus commuting between work and evening courses. And this is most of us. We all have work responsibilities, family responsibilities, and we're trying to study, we're trying to be prepared for the interactions that we have with our instructors, with our learners. And it's not just the students who aren't always prepared. A lot of us have really busy lives, and it's those busy lives that are the barrier. So if we can move some of the interactions that we have to a place where they can happen on someone's mobile device, we may have just given people 20 more minutes for study that they didn't have before. And the next slide shows disproportionately, especially in the STEM fields, those barriers are often felt more by women than by men. They have family responsibilities more often. They're fighting against stereotypes as being the nurturing and caring ones, and so they get a lot of other responsibilities, oftentimes dumped on them unthinkingly. And so one of the challenges is, how do we provide just 20 more minutes in the day for people to study, keep up, and be prepared to have the kinds of interactions and dialogues that we want to in our courses? And I'll end with the last slide here, and that is, universal design for learning doesn't have to be a great big, super huge accessibility thing. If you go to the last slide, please. It's just +1 thinking and design. I'm looking forward to hearing from Roberta and Marty and from the rest of you. It looks like we had a question there from Robert. And sorry, I can't see it on my screen anymore. There it is. He says, an important aspect for me with regard to designing an online data visualization course was to use only open source software like R or ggplot. Can you speak to this issue more generally? Actually, I'm going to save that question for Marty because that's in his wheelhouse. But we're going to talk a little bit about how, when we're talking about lowering barriers and design, if you like, even if you're using R or ggplot, make little videos of you using the software so that somebody doesn't have to have R on their mobile phone. And there's no mobile version of R, right? So one of the challenges is, how can we give people interaction time so that when they do come into an environment where they have access to those tools, they're ready to use the tools? So excellent question. And I'll turn it back over to Patrick with all of you.
All right. Thanks so much, Tom. And Tara, if you could bring Marty up on stage. Next, we are going to hear from Marty Samuels. And just to thank you for the text question, just to remind everyone, you do have the option of either submitting a text question or raising your hand to come up on stage. And as a reminder, all the panelists will come up on stage at the end, and you'll also have an opportunity at that time to talk with them. So welcome, Marty. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for inviting me, Patrice.
So you're Associate Director for Science at the Bach Center for Teaching and Learning at Harvard University. Could you tell us a little bit about your role, what some of your goals are, and what success might look like for you?
Yeah, so I primarily work with grad students, faculty, and undergrad teachers as well, who are teaching undergrads in classes. And I think to predate your maybe a later question of yours, I think one of the biggest challenges I face is most science teachers who I work with come to me because they want to teach their science class better, or they didn't get great student evaluations last year and they want to teach their chemistry class or engineering class better, or one concept in psychology they're always afraid that they never get their students to land. And so they're always thinking about the content centrally. And so what basically my biggest challenge is to try to get teachers to think less about the content of their class as like the focal point, and more about the students, and like, what would a student who's just learning this material, what would they care about? What would it look like to learn this thing? What's an authentic use of this? What do you want the students to become motivated by and do next? Do you want them to take another psychology class, another chemistry class? Do you want them to write a thesis in it? Do you want them to join a lab? Do you want them to do a summer internship? Do you want them to be able to read a paper in the New York Times and be able to vet whether or not they agree or disagree with it? Do you want them to write a letter to their senator about it? Do you want them to be a senator or a lawyer who could think about this thing in like 10 or 20 years? So much of our politics now, I feel like, is a good impetus for us to think about what do we wish our congresspeople thought about or said, and how could we train our current students to be those future leaders, even if they're not going to become scientists. What do we hope that they learn in the future? So my priority is largely trying to work with faculty and kind of assume the value system that they bring in, which is usually about their discipline, and to kind of take a part of that, but help them shift their value system a little bit to thinking about what do students care about this? What are they going to get out of it? And how can we help all of your students in your class succeed?
Thanks. I like that approach of not having faculty get stuck on the content portion and just really focusing on the student experience. And thinking about that, there's a lot of research that's been done on persistence in STEM courses with respect to active learning. And when we first met, we talked a little bit about that and, the potential role it might play in, for example, sense of belonging. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your work in this area and some of the strategies that you're using.
Yeah, so, there's a couple of things. One, you have like this slide deck, and I think that in a couple of slides you might have to roll for a little while. But because I do work with science teachers so often, and we all have our different value systems, but a lot of science teachers value data. And so I try to show them some of the slides, particularly from this educational group at Stanford, Greg Walton and his colleagues. I think the guy's name is Yeager, Dan Yeager, D. Yeager. I can't remember what his first name is. But they've done a lot of work on what are the grade point average, like what are the actual measurable things we can measure as students develop a sense of belonging. And maybe if we could advance a few slides, if that's possible, or if it's not, that's okay too. But one is I try to demonstrate, one, the power of helping students explicitly feel like a sense of belonging in a class. That like small interventions, like an hour intervention, has years worth of impact in student GPAs. So you can actually see the achievement gap between underrepresented minorities and non-underrepresented minorities decrease throughout 4 years of college. If you spend about an hour with them their freshman year, helping them realize two things about their sense of belonging. One, it is totally fine if you don't feel completely at home when you first come to college. No one does, right? So that like feeling ill at ease when you first come to college and not having a sense of community is common and transient, that everyone eventually does find a home and everyone eventually does find a set of their friends. Okay, so at this point, maybe it's like probably 4 or 5 slides down. If you can kind of advance a few of those slides, some of these data sets. Yeah, if you could keep going to the next slide, perhaps. It'll be a couple slides from here. These slides are actually all about trying to access a faculty member's different perspective, not their value that they put in terms of data of experiments and educational experiments, but their values of what does it mean to feel like they don't have an opportunity or to feel excluded? What does an exclusive classroom look like as opposed to an inclusive classroom? And so one way that we try to get faculty to think about what an exclusive classroom might feel like is where we just give everyone an assignment to make a baby mobile. We actually just give everyone different materials without telling them that we're giving them different amounts of materials to begin with. And this is an activity that other people have developed, colleagues of mine have developed, so I can't take credit for it. But it's an amazing activity because it always, after giving people a high resource bag, some people I give a high resource bag with like lots of like glitter glue or whatever to make a baby mobile. Some people I give a medium resource bag, so kind of colorful construction paper to make a baby mobile. And some people I give a low resource bag where I might not even give them string or anything, like maybe a single marker to kind of decorate a blank white piece of paper. And during the 7 minutes I ask everyone to make a baby mobile, often no one notices that there's a disparity, right? Just like none of our students notice that other people are kind of coming in with different backgrounds in our classrooms. And also if I put like a pile of additional resources in the back of our class, I will say, does anyone think that they want to use the additional resources? And people will say, no, I didn't know if I was allowed to use them. And I'll say, great, those are office hours. Those are what our students think are these additional resources that we are always trying to provide our students with are. And which really speaks to like, how do we help our students understand what are often the unwritten rules of engagement, which are, when do I have a question that I'm allowed to ask during office hours? When is an appropriate time to come and talk to a faculty member? And when am I allowed to ask for an extension? When am I allowed to ask for extra help on something? If I go to office hours and some students are asking very sophisticated questions, am I allowed to ask my less sophisticated question? And I think that these are very often some of the big linchpins that we are dealing with in our classes. In particular, this is heartbreaking, but I've worked, as an advisor, I've worked with hundreds of students who, as sophomores, take organic chemistry, and they so often don't know when they're allowed to ask a question. That's very often the first hard class that they take in college. So when am I allowed to ask a question of my teacher, or how do I engage with office hours at that point? And we have a lot of struggling students who basically don't know how to participate in class, like how to study effectively, how to make use of the class resources effectively. So we want to help them. We want to help teachers to think about how they can explicitly make those rules of engagement very clear and meaningful to their students. So in addition to a bunch of workshops I do with teachers where I ask them, how can we make the rules of how to participate in this class much more explicit? And, if a student, when is it fair for a student to invite you to a faculty dinner, or when is it fair for you to invite them to lunch or dinner or your office hours or some reason to talk to them? I also try to model this. So I teach one of the intro chemistry classes too, and I am kind of continuously inviting other faculty to come and watch me. And I am trying to always tell the students, please come work with us. We want to know not only what questions you have, but what motivates you. What are your values? What do you want to get out of this class? How do we help you achieve those values? We want to learn from you in the same way that we want you to learn from us. so that our help rooms are really less office hours where we are trying to tell you something and really an invitation to a conversation that we want to work with you in. But yeah, so we still haven't gotten to a few of these data slides, but eventually they come in, and that kind of speaks to a teacher's other value sense, which is like, how do I explain, how would I believe that helping my students feel included in the class is powerful or important? And so there's like 2 or 3 more slides to go. Sorry about this. But these slides I also use in these workshops also speak to the fact that diversity is important for our own research. There's tons of evidence. These are papers from Nature speaking to the more diverse and collaborative we are, the better our scientific research is, and I would say the better our classrooms are as well. Yep, we're getting there. So yeah, so this maybe is like one of these data points where the more we can actually use active learning in our classrooms, the more we can actually reduce the achievement gap that we can see, and there's tons of evidence about that. These are 2 of my favorite examples of increasing class structure time, so asking questions of our students, telling them when they're supposed to run something, what learning would look like, and that has big ramifications for reducing achievement gaps between first generation and continuing generation students. And also between underrepresented minorities and non-URM students. And I think you might have missed that animation on this slide, but there's still the belonging slides are like two more slides to go, maybe at this point, but that's also, here we are. So this is one of the papers done by Walton and Cohen, where they did the social belonging intervention right in the middle of the students' freshman year. And the belonging intervention sounds very sophisticated, but it's very short. And all it did was try to help students understand that feeling that social adversity is common, that everyone goes through it, and it's transient, that we all get over it, we find our friend group. Actually, you can see that the GPA of the African-American students basically increases, who are kind of a component of this thing. Their GPA increases throughout the end of college. And so by the end, the achievement gap is reduced to basically 90% of what it was at the start of college. If you go to the next slide has the same thing, but not for college, but for grad students in engineering. And it shows that the achievement gap between men and women, class is dominated by men, so less than 20% women. The same authors, Walton, they said that they do the same social adversity treatment. So they said belonging is a hard thing. Most people don't feel belonging at first when they first come to a college, but that sense of adversity dissipates over time and everyone goes through it. And just that short social intervention dramatically, obliterates the achievement gap in this experiment between men and women engineers at this Canadian engineering school for our grad students. And so these are the kind of data that we're kind of always trying to show science teachers, that these are important things to explicitly discuss with our students and to try to provide them time and space to think about how they can explicitly talk about these things and to model it ourselves. And so those are like major concerns of mine. Like, are we, in science classrooms, are we teaching all of our students, or are we only selecting for the students who are great when they come into our class? And we should be teaching all of our students to succeed in our class and to fall in love with our discipline, to be motivated by our disciplines. And not just the students who had an internship in high school, or have who are parents who are scientists, or who have some kind of particularly great background in some particular topic. So how do we teach everyone in our class who doesn't just have, and not just privileging students who have a particular background, or privileging students who have a lot of power or authority, unfairly, when they come into a classroom because they're basically white guys, which is what science classes tend to privilege. I just rambled forever there. I'm so sorry, Patrice.
That's okay. That's great. I think, you brought up some really important points, especially the discussion around cultural capital, right? Like, how do I know when I can ask a question? Or, as you said, certain students just come in with a different background where maybe they know how to find resources, or, are more open to talking to a faculty member. And I think, in addition to cultural capital, sometimes women may have that knowledge, but as you said, like, you know, they may be a minority in the classroom and may not feel comfortable raising their hand or, you know, going to talk with the faculty member. And so with that in mind, if you could just talk for a minute or two about, you know, what do you see as some of the challenges for women right now? And is there anything, you know, beyond what you shared with us already, anything that you might recommend or suggest to help us move the needle a little bit?
Well, we have a lot, and I doubt this is unique for us, but we have a lot of awesome mentorship programs. So where current faculty can mentor current grad students, and we have a Women in Science program that has faculty mentoring, like meeting students who are grad students who are not their own grad students, but like grad students in a different discipline, in a different field. So like biologists helping engineers or things like that. Just to be able to have someone to talk to. I think over and over again, having someone who you trust is the most important thing for learning or for retention or for the biggest bang of the buck that we ever get out of outreach programs or summer internship programs is making a close connection with a colleague that you trust or like a mentor that you trust. So that is a humongously powerful thing that we try to be for our students, but we try to explicitly do for our grad students as well. I'm a mentor for like 5 undergrads explicitly who I kind of meet a couple of times, like once every couple of weeks to talk about papers, but really how classes are going and things like that. And, you know, I think opportunities for students to mingle things that they value, like science, with other things that they value. And that could be a lot of things. That could be public policy for people who want to talk about how they talk about science and public and government. That could be outreach and people who really care about teaching the science that they're doing in their lab, but teaching it to 3rd graders or 12th graders. Or communication, people who care about their science and about how to communicate it with the broader public. Or you know, other things like that. So if people have additional values like rhetoric, motivating other students or people who you know, come from diverse populations, those can be really powerful tools and are really great ways of making people feel that their science matters, but the science does not only matter because of the science sake, but also helps them communicate with other human beings as well, and helps them kind of engage with other people as well. So just like Tom was talking about, that this +1 thinking has to involve not just the content, but also other human engagement components as well.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I think I agree the importance of mentors cannot be understated, and also helping students find meaning. I think you're right. Like a lot of times for women, when they come into an engineering classroom, they're not really sure how the content relates to things that are meaningful to them, which mentoring can help with also. So thank you very much. We appreciate your time. And there's been some requests for the slides. So I'll follow up with each of the speakers afterwards and see about getting all the participants the slides.
Thank you.
And next up will be, thank you. And next up will be Robin Sullivan. And again, just a reminder, if you have a question, to please type it in the chat box or raise your hand and come up on stage and join us in the conversation. Hi, Robin. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Patrice.
And of course, Robin and I have known each other for a long, long time. I've started at SUNY, and so we've been colleagues for quite a while, and I really appreciate your time with us today. So as we mentioned earlier, your role is in the Center for Educational Innovation at University at Buffalo, and I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about the center and your role there and how you support faculty and students.
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity to talk with everybody today. I really appreciate it. So the Center for Educational Innovation, we are the main unit within the University of Buffalo, which is one of the 64 SUNY campuses, a research institution, that our role is to work with faculty to help them design courses. So we talk a lot about inclusive pedagogy. If you can go to the next slide, please. So Our center, we work one-on-one with faculty, but we also try to work in group situations and through departments. We have a number of schools within the center. This slide just shows you where to get the slides. So I will share that with Patrice and she can get it. I have a lot of resources in here, I hope, to share with everyone. Next slide. So I just wanted to just share this quick definition about inclusive pedagogy. And so part of our center, I work with faculty to help them come up with creative ways to assess students. And we always try to incorporate the idea of inclusive pedagogy and universal design. And, you know, this definition just kind of struck me that inclusive pedagogy, we try to minimize the inequities and shape the dynamics of the learning spaces so that everybody has an equal access to the class and to the curriculum. Next slide. And so the slide here, I just wanted to, you know, I think we've talked about what universal design, have a great introduction, but, you know, if you can design from the beginning to make your courses accessible, that's much better than trying to retrofit after the fact. Oh, I have a student that has some needs for accommodations and then trying to scramble to make your course accessible. So in my presentation here, I'm going to give you some ideas of ways that you can make alternate options for students. If you can go to the next slide. So this slide just talks about a 21st century learner of today. The 4 C's that are identified that every student or learner needs to have is the ability to communicate, collaborate, be creative, and also be a critical thinker. The next slide. I kind of added to those C's that are collecting, and to be an inclusive educator, main thing is if you can provide choice to students. Tom definitely brought that idea up in his conversation. If you can provide a student control over their own learning, give them an autonomous way to master the course content, but all the while, if the instructor can provide that caring attitude that they are there, able to be relied on as a resource, I think that's one of the really important things, especially when it comes to assisting women in the classroom in STEM. You know, they need to be able to rely on their mentors, on the faculty that they are working with. Next slide, please. This is just not an extensive or exhaustive list of the types of students that you might come across in your classrooms, but they're not, you know, I think sometimes you think of students with disabilities and you think of just hearing impaired and visually impaired. There are a number of groups of individuals that we need to make sure that we're reaching. The idea of being temporarily disabled is something that a lot of people don't think about. So on the next slide, some examples of, you know, what might be some permanent disabilities. You know, somebody might be blind or deaf, or if they have a temporary disability, then maybe, you know, somebody has a sprained arm and they can't write. So they need alternate ways to interact with the content in the course and the activities. Somebody that maybe just has a cold won't be able to talk, but they'll still need to, you know, take action within the course, and situational issues. Somebody that is a new parent, they're the same as somebody that has only a single arm because they have a child there. So I just wanted to kind of bring that up, that the different types of students that you might come across in your teaching. Next slide. This is a slide that you might have seen it on the internet. it just shows visually that there are some people. My neck of the woods happens to be probably one of the brightest spots, but there are so many other parts of the globe that students do not have access to the technologies that they need. And so we do need to make choice for those students when you're designing learning opportunities. Next slide. And I think this was alluded to in both Marty and Tom's conversations, that probably the best thing you can do is to encourage your learners to have a growth mindset. Having somebody think, oh, well, I'm a female, I can't do this. I'm not good at math. The idea that if you work hard at something, you can grow your mind to be able to understand something that you had not understood before. Next, please. So this is just a short video that one of the faculty here at UB has put together for us about growth mindset. So it's just one of the resources you can refer to. I'm not going to play it here, but I do want to point it out to you. Next slide. Some ideas of ways to provide opportunities for assignments. When you have some text information, being able to just provide that in voice, or being able to provide that in a way that a screen reader can read it, is one way to do that. Provide opportunities for self-assessment, so a student can understand what parts of the learning they're understanding or not. And I think in today's society, a connected learning environment. So being able to connect to others and learn, I think, is a really powerful way, and technologies certainly help us to do that. So on the next slide, I just have a small table that has some, actually, I think I rearranged them from my friend here. So I just want to talk about the ability to provide the media experiences, whether it's video or audio, and the importance of being able to caption that. So you might think that, there's just a very small fragment of people that take advantage of the captioning in the YouTube videos or any other type of videos, but actually 80% are of individuals use the closed captioning for different purposes besides if they just are deaf. And I definitely do it myself. I turn on the captions just to try to pay closer attention and focus more on the content. Our society is also aging, and the number of people that will be in the older generations is going to double by the year 2050. And so that's another reason why captioning is going to be even more important. Next, please. And also, we did a survey at UB, what our students use for assistive technologies, and just some of these numbers would help to understand that that there's all types of assistive technology that's available. Next, please. Next slide. Maybe stuck here. Providing a variety of role models is very important. Often, you might show the list of CEOs, and being able to show that there are women in these mentor capacities, and women that are prominent in the sciences and in all types of areas, is something that when you're designing your content, to be cognizant of showing different cultures and people in different situations. Next, please. And I think just some of the ideas. Patrice, I think you had another question on there.
Yes. So can I know that one of the tools that your group supports is Ally, and some but not all of our participants may be familiar with the tool. So if you could just tell us a little bit about what the tool is and how you're using it to support students and faculty at Buffalo.
As we help faculty design courses, the Blackboard Learning Management System is the system that we use at our university. And so Ally is just one of the new tools that are available. And what that does, it is an accessibility checker. And it will go through the content of your course, and it will provide multiple formats. So that ability to make sure that students have maybe the ability to read an item or listen to it. It will also flag items in your course, images that do not have the descriptions or the alt text will be shown so that you can click on the Ally interface and be able to immediately add captioning to or alt tags to those images. So it's just one of the technologies that's available to try to make your course accessible from the very beginning. It gives you a visual symbol when something needs to be modified. Next.
Could you is that tool only work on Blackboard, or can people in other LMSs use it as well?
I am not 100% sure of that answer. I believe it's with Blackboard only, but there is a free version of Blackboard online at CourseSites.com. So I have known that some people are uploading content into CourseSites to see what Ally will do, and there are some formats that it will let you download. That's kind of a workaround and not really meant in that way. But it's one of the new tools in an LMS, and I believe that the other companies will follow. It does seem to be getting a lot of favorable comments.
All right, thanks.
So,
can you tell us?
Go ahead.
No, you can go ahead.
I just wanted to share just one couple resources that describe the barriers that somebody might have and what you can do to remove those barriers. And these are more of kind of a practical checklist of things that you can check in your course. Are you providing different formats for conversation? Are you providing different media? Next slide. And also being able to, I think we've talked about this one. I'm going to skip over this. A little redundant. Next slide. So the one slide where I showed that the world has got many different variations of populations, also many variations of access. I am a supporter of MOOCs being able to provide access to those who do not have the ability to go to a university as easily as we do here in the States. And so I just wanted to share a project that I'm working on that will hopefully give you some of the tools to make your courses and assignments a little bit more accessible. Next slide. So the Exploring Emerging Technologies for Lifelong Learning and Success MOOC is available on the Coursera platform, and there's a link there that you can access it. Basically what this course does, it helps faculty, students, and anybody throughout the world, whether you're a retiree or somebody seeking a job, to increase your understanding of emerging technologies, to give you the ability to create multiple ways of learning for students. There's sections in there that tell you how you can add captioning, how you can turn captioning on so that a student can do that, how to find and use open educational resources so you can lower the socioeconomical barriers that might exist for accessing learning content. Next slide. So I did mention that this is available for anybody. And we do target learning in there, but it's relevant for the professional and personal growth of everybody. Next slide. This is the project is in two parts. So there's the Coursera-based MOOC that has some video content, but basically the meat and potatoes of the project is a socially curated database of technology tools. And so it's based on a wiki, and you can go there and you can pull the category of accessibility, and it'll give you many checklists and items that will help you create an accessible course, but it'll also give you the tools if you want to create media, or if you want to do some PDF editing to make your PDF files accessible. So that's a resource that's available to you. The next slide, I think, has a picture of the wiki and how it's embedded into the Coursera system. Next slide. So it's just a very simple process if you do decide to go through the MOOC, but the wiki itself is standalone. What you do is you go through the course and read and participate with the course materials. We try to have a couple different examples available, both reading and caption text, of course. Then you will explore some of the tools that are available, complete an exercise, and then communicate and connect in discussion forum about what you learned and how you're going to make your courses accessible. You can earn a certificate and a badge at the end. And I think I'm going to just leave it at that. This is just a slide of where we have some of the learners in the MOOC. And I think that's probably, I should leave it here and give us a lot of time for questions and answers. And if we have time at the very end, but I don't want to do it now, we can maybe do a Think, Pair, Share kind of activity to allow people to go into the MOOC and possibly find some of the resources and maybe share back how they might convert some of their assigned course materials into additional formats than what they are in right now. But I think it would be great to kind of take some questions.
Okay, thanks, Robin. So at this point, we will invite Marty and Tom back up on stage to join us. And I actually think Marty has a question for you. And I would also like to encourage everyone in the audience. This is a point where you can come up on stage and ask your question directly to our panelists or type something into the chat box.
Yeah, Robin, I don't know if you have any advice for how to do that.
I think, in many institutions there are just the centers in places where students can have an exam or an assessment and not be constrained as much as they are in a regular classroom. But just being able to provide opportunities for students to demonstrate what they learn and be able to master the course content and not have to restrict them or stress them out that it needs to be done in this certain amount of time. So just maybe providing one more choice for the students to demonstrate that they're understanding the learning objectives.
So I had a follow-up question on that possibly one of you could help me think about. In a discussion I was having with a few faculty members about ways to actually design for inclusion in their classroom, and some of the topics that came up were giving different types of quizzes or assignments at the start of the class. And somebody did ask, if you have someone who needs extra time, something that's taking place in the classroom, how do you allow for that extra time without essentially having them be singled out that they are someone that needs that accommodation? And so I was wondering if you had any suggestions for that.
Yeah, I'm not sure to provide multiple ways for students to demonstrate that they're getting the learning objectives. Quizzes might just be one way for students to demonstrate that they're understanding the information. But if you can provide also projects and activities and just kind of weight your grade book accordingly so that a student that is not that great at quizzing or needs the additional time can excel a lot at creating maybe a very creative multimedia story or interview or whatever about an experiment or so being able to, again, provide choice.
And I can come in on that one as well. And it gets us to the psychological concept of construct relevance. What are we actually testing our students about? And if we're testing our students on their accuracy and ability to recall information, that's one thing. But if we're testing our students on their ability to complete tasks quickly, then a time limit makes sense. But if the time limit is an arbitrary construct, that it's just one class period and that's all we've got, well, if we're teaching on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, then that class period is 50 minutes long, and we design our tests to take 50 minutes. And if the class period meets Tuesdays and Thursdays, we design 90-minute tests. So the challenge is that we're designing in many cases based on time rather than based on the skills that we want to see. And Marty touched on this earlier. So if you have a time limit on a test, are you actually grading them on how fast they complete? And if the answer is no, allow your students a way to demonstrate the skills that does not have the time component in it. And I know that that's a little heretical to say in some disciplines. Well, the students have to be able to complete it, otherwise the next class period will come in. Then what you do is you give more frequent, shorter tests that cover less information, and then you ask your students to demonstrate their skills in a way that isn't cheatable, that isn't fakeable, that they're doing a project or a lab or something where they have to report their own results. So the idea is a time test and then giving somebody extra time. Patrice is right on the money here that you could call somebody out as being, needing a special accommodation, or you could question the idea of, should there be a time limit here at all? And construct relevance just means, are we actually testing what we want to test, and are we assigning other constructs and other limitations that have nothing to do with the things that we're actually grading? So if you really want some good reading, just Google construct relevance and you'll do a little dive down the rabbit hole with that.
All right, thanks, Tom. And we have a question from Becky in our audience. So I'm going to come down from the stage, and Becky is going to come up and share her question with you.
I loved your answer, by the way, Tom. I completely agree with everything you just said.
Thanks a bunch. It looks like Becky's here with us. Hi, Becky. Or it looks like Becky's almost here with us.
Mentor program. When did it
Hey, Becky,
start?
we just got connection in the middle of your conversation, so if you could start your question over, please. Sorry about that.
Sure. I have a feeling my netbook is not working so well. I had some questions for Marty about his mentor program. When did it start? How many people are involved in it, mentors and students, and what metrics you might have to tell you how well it's doing, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I don't really thank you for that. Any metrics about how good it's doing, although we try to measure it every once in a while. It probably handles about 200 students at any particular moment. So it's kind of like biochemistry students, which is kind of like my niche in the universe. And SAC, we have 2 and 4 students at any particular time. And it's kind of, in a way, it's kind of cheating because we kind of just assume that mentors teach students all the stuff that we don't actually teach in class. So I think it kind of started as never teach students how to do experiments in science classes somehow. Like, what an appalling thing to realize. We don't teach them how to read papers or to interpret experiments or to figure out if they trust a paper or not, right? So I think of that like 20 years ago. It's been going on for about 25 years.
Pretty good.
Yeah, I think it's pretty good. But, obviously no one checks up on anyone, right? So like in anything else, the good teacher has a lot of students in their office hours and basically is penalized for being good. And mentors meet with their students frequently and basically don't have enough time as a consequence for anything else in their life. And bad mentors ignore their students and no one ever knows. So it's, it's hard to know how effective it is. But I think it's good for at least some people.
I think it's pretty good that you've got 60 faculty member engaged. So that's pretty good in itself.
Yeah, no, we love it. We ask people to kind of update their resume all the time. So like, what are you studying today as opposed to what were you studying 5 years ago? So like, we can still kind of match to their faculty interests or whatnot. And like, what do you want to do with students? We also ask that. Like, do you want to read papers with them? Do you want to talk about your research? We have some lawyers, right? Like, do you want to have like a patent lawyer who's going to talk to you about like how science and technology integrate? Or we have other people who work in like policy think tanks and things like that too. So we kind of want to tailor it to like a meaningful relationship. Basically, we want students to have a meaningful adult relationship with someone. So that's the goal that we have. Whatever that actually turns into is always different for every single thing. It's hard to measure. We don't have.
So are the teachers, do they have to do this as part of their obligation? I was just wondering how you encourage them to participate.
Right. So we assign people, it's like a voluntary, like it's bullet pointed on all of our CVs, right? So I think everyone is assigned as a tutor on the board of biochemical sciences, whatever that means. If they are already employed by the university, they get no money as a contract. If a company and they used to be a grad, like if we know them because they used to be a grad student with us, but now they, do something else, and now they no longer officially have a university position, we pay them some nominal fee per student, so like $200 per student who we give them or something like that.
That's an interesting concept that you have people who aren't faculty members but have the experience and the knowledge of your institution as part of the program. So
and well, sorry, I'm sure someone has an interesting thing to say, but one thing that's cool, often who miss teaching because they left the university, right? So they want to have a mentoring position, but they can't because they work at like a venture capital company, right? So like this is like their opportunity to still, be formative and shape the future leaders of the next generation or whatever.
Yeah, that's a good point we can grab maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
And maybe one way that we can.
Sorry, Tom.
Oh, no worries. I was going to say maybe one way we can throw this back open to everybody is to talk a little bit about how bringing in people from outside who used to be in academia, like Marty's talking about, how does that help lower barriers? Because we're all socialized that, unless you're giving back for the greater glory of the profession, that it's somehow unseemly or unacademic. And that can be a barrier for people who have been trained up their whole lives that they should be sort of quiet and studious and follow the professor kind of thing. And how do you give people that agency and that voice, especially in this Women in STEM panel? Yeah. That's an important question. So, Becky, thank you very much for your questions. We'll bring Patrice back up here on the stage, and we'd love to hear comments and more concerns and questions from everybody. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It looks like we have a question coming in from Lori Nikasik. Lori's connecting here. And Lori, we can see you and hear you. Hello.
Hey, great. I'm hoping this is good, kind of on topic with where we're going, but I'm wondering, has anyone had success at their institution with trying to promote inclusive online course design or just accessible course design? And if you were successful with your institution, what do you think helped make that successful push to get more faculty into using those practices and to be just a accessible type of college?
I nominate Robin to answer this one.
Okay. Oh, I can't hear her.
Robin, take your mute off.
No, take my mute off.
There we go.
Okay. Thank you. So I would love to address the question. And the SUNY system, the State University of New York system, has developed the OSCAR rubric. And that is available online. OSCAR open SUNY quality reviews. So I will make sure to put that link in one of my final slides with all the resources. If you just go to oscar.org, and there's a
And I
large
just shared that down in
section.
the chat.
Thank you very much. So there's a large section of that rubric that talks about accessibility, and it was created for the online division within SUNY. And different campuses, so we have 64 different campuses. Each campus has a different approach to how they are implementing that rubric. Basically, instructional designers like myself here at UB, I work with faculty and show them the rubric and have them go through and self-assess how they are meeting those criteria, along with many other criteria for their online course. And some campuses do have it as a requirement for faculty before they actually teach their course. So because our system has so many different types of institutions, it's very different. But there's also an online course that helps faculty learn about designing their online course called the Quality by Design. And that actually, I think we are wrapping up the fall cohort, but it is available for anybody to enroll in as a self-paced unit that kind of has activities that will help you understand the OSCAR rubric, including these section on accessibility. And basically the best way for learning is when faculty talk to each other in the discussion forums about how they are meeting these needs. And that's how we manage that.
Awesome. Thank you, Lori. And if there's anybody else who'd like to come on stage and talk with us, looks like Patrice is coming back, and we might have some questions that have come in by text or other methods.
And I also don't know if we answered Roger's question from very early. Maybe Roger might want to come up and ask that question, or maybe at least if it can be re-shown in the question, if that's possible. Or
Yeah, that's a great point. And if I recall Roger's question, it was about how is a specific. Oh, there we go.
Yep, here comes Roger. So we'll let the man ask his question. So,
Give it to us, Roger.
Oh, good. So yeah, my question
Mute.
was.
or loudness.
Oh,
Can hear you
maybe
slightly.
you can hear me okay now, or no?
A little bit.
and everybody, if you can't hear Roger, don't worry about the volume. There's a Shindig control. If you hover your mouse over Roger, there's a volume control, and you can turn him just fine. Go ahead, Roger.
All right. So any better now that I'm? Okay.
Thank you much.
So earbuds helps. So my question was, I guess my background, I was a professor in psychology at SUNY Oswego for a number of years, but didn't get tenure. Oh well. But one of the things that was really important to me when I was doing it was making it affordable. So I come from a kind of working class family. And then I wanted the students, after they left, to be able to, I taught them how to do analyses and do data visualizations. I wanted them to be able to use that instead of, say, SPSS, which is $1,000. So the open source software was one. And one thing I struggled with that I never got a solution was the textbooks were insanely expensive. So I would try to give them kind of PDFs of, I don't know if there was any solution also in terms of textbook costs. I know there's an emphasis on that, but I didn't know where that was. So I guess lower cost for kind of working class, regular students was my main concern.
So I use OpenStax, but basically it occurred to me that none of our students read the textbook anyway, so why do we make them buy this $200 thing? And so in some universe, and I feel like this all may have this, right? Flip or transform or whatever the nature of our class is, where it's, something like at least 30% of it is like students doing group work with each other, like in the big lecture hall. And to do that, I ended up writing like 2-page pre-readings for every kind of class, just like definitional terms. This is a this, this is a this, this is a this. Just so the first time they hear me say some crazy word, it's not in a class, and they kind of anxiety. So hopefully they read it a little bit ahead of time. And then by the time I wrote all those 2-page things before every class, then it really became obvious the textbook was not necessary. So then we just ended up writing whatever, including whatever free textbook exists, but not really caring if students use it or not. To your point about software, and actually, I think this came up either with Robin or Tom earlier, that I use a couple of pieces of software because I'm a nerd, called Pymol, like a 3D visual displayer. But I just make videos of it all the time for the students so that they can passively engage with it, even if I'm actively engaging with it. And then for Studio, I always, and you know, I always ask students to do assignments, whatever is easiest for them. So using for an objective of mine. So I would say, if you can use MATLAB or R or Excel, whatever it is, just graph the thing that we care about, you know? And we are roughly happy to help you with any of those, but our goal is the graphing, it's not the software. And if your goal is to have students actually learn how to use R, then that's like another thing at that point, you know, but that's never been an explicit concern of mine.
Okay.
If I could add,
And if I could, oh, go ahead,
go
Robin.
ahead, Tom, you first.
Okay, I just wanted to say, as Marty was talking, I put a link to OpenStax into the chat, and I also want to sing the praises of the OER STEM project that the U.S. did together. It's called Links. I put the link, 2 links into the chat as well, and it is a collection of open educational resources specifically in the STEM fields for teaching, and all of them, because they've received federal grant money, they are also following the accessibility guidelines that we've all been talking about in terms of inclusive access. So it's an excellent, excellent place. And Robin, I'm sorry I cut you off. Please add.
So I just want to mention that one of the criteria that we tried to build EMTech MOOC around is freely available tools. There's a few tools in the database, maybe we got about 200, 300 tools in there that are not freely available tools, but we did want to try to make things accessible to learners. Another section, so accessibility is one section, video is another section. There's a couple other categories that the tools are classified, but we also have a great section on OER, being able to design and develop, design, develop, and also locate OER, open educational resources. And SUNY is really promoting open educational resources to make the learning more accessible to students, no matter, without the cost of expensive textbooks. So definitely check it out and,
Robin,
siphon.
you were talking, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. You were speaking a little bit about online and accessibility earlier. Some friends of mine at the extension school, they have a really good set of software that we don't have in the college, but about having online office hours, a way to kind of the logistics of everyone kind of finding each other in the same physical space to ask a question. I don't know if you have any, as long as you're talking about like online tools that can make teaching more accessible, are you familiar with that at all, or?
There's a number of tools that can be used for online office hours. For example, something like Shindig. You would be able to hold your office hours in a tool like this, or different web conferencing tools, chat tools that are available. And there's, some free options that are out there, and there's also freemium. So you get so much time with the free version, but if you want the more extensive version, then you have to pay. But you can usually figure out how can you, the limitation on Zoom, which is, one of the more popular ones, is a 40-minute limit. And so if you can have office hours certainly within 40 minutes, or even that's a good way to make sure your meetings stay on task. But there are a number of collaboration tools. Collaboration tools is one other section of tools that we've tried to narrow down within the wiki. So we might do that.
Thank you.
And then also, how to caption them so that maybe other students can benefit from that text version. Any other questions? Oh, ASU uses Shindig for office hours. That's great.
Great. So
Yeah, some of my
before we
colleagues
wrap up, I was just going to ask before we wrap up if Robin, Tom, or Marty, if any of you have questions for one another or a final parting thought.
I always like to end, if we have maybe 3 or 4 minutes, with a question to everybody who's here. You don't have to come up on stage, but if you're near a keyboard, what's one thing you're going to take away from our conversation today? Either did we underline something that was really useful for you, something you already knew, but now you know how to talk to your colleagues about it? Did you come up with something that you want to try out, or we raise a question that is burning for you? So take a couple of seconds and just key that into the chat, and I'll ask just what's one thing you're going to take away and bring back to your institution. We talked a lot about practical ideas and things like that. So, and I'll turn it over to Robin and Marty for closing ideas too.
My one thought, I think, as people are coming up with their ideas, just start making an effort. You're not going to convert your entire course to be universally designed for every possible learner, probably in your lifetime. But if you can make an effort towards that goal, then that's a fabulous start.
I feel like I've learned so much just from listening to all three of you speak. Just in response to Tom's thing, I feel like I use both the 3D diagrams a lot, and it really makes me think that I need to figure out ways of textually annotating all of those figures so that people can understand what they mean and not just what like today I started off class today by showing students an image and just having a conversation about what do they think that means. And that was like a 20-minute conversation, right? Like it was supposed to be a 2-minute conversation. And, it's so easy to trick myself into thinking that if I understand a figure, then other people must understand the figure too. And you just need to, I feel like my eyes are very much opening up to the fact that I need to do much more explicit messaging of what a figure conveys.
Cool. And it looks like we have some feedback as well along those lines in the chat. Lori's saying, I like the +1 concept, simplifying inclusivity down to something that people can get their brains around. Carol talking about planning to share that Oscar rubric with her colleagues. So tip of the hat to Robin for sharing that. And Becky's talking about the idea of belonging and how important that is. So somebody's taking things away from Marty here. I got another comment, the importance of social belonging and creating inclusivity. It's not just about course content. So taking that away from Marty. And Roger saying it was encouraging to see other people who value this topic. When he was a faculty member, he was a lone voice trying to advocate it for other faculty members. So really excellent takeaways, folks. And I hope I speak for all of us when I say thank you, Patrice. Thank you to the Women in STEM folks for inviting us all to be part of this conversation. We enjoyed it a lot.
Yep. And thank you very much to all of our participants. This does conclude our session today. And I would also like to thank Tara and Shindig for allowing us to use this platform for our sessions. And Becky Burke, who was one of the people that came up on stage. She is also one of our colleagues who helps with the planning process and putting this whole session together. So thanks a bunch to her as well. And last but not least, I would like to thank all of you for joining us today and to invite you to our next session, which will take place on February 13th. At the same time, 12 p.m. Eastern Time. And the topic for that will be mentoring women in STEM. And we had a bit of a primer, thanks to Marty, on that topic today. So I hope you all can make it. And we will work at putting all of the slides together and getting those shared out to you as well. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us. And until next time, if you are having a sunny day like us here in Cambridge, I hope you have some time to go out and enjoy it.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Cheers.